I rock guitar, and I am Redemption Church.
I serve in the nursery because I am Redemption Church.
I teach junior hires because I am Redemption Church. Woo! I teach kindergarten and first grade.
I run graphics.
Sing on worship team.
Lead RC Kids because I am Redemption Church.
What is up? What, you leaving? I'm just walking up and you're leaving? Dude, that wounds an ego right there, bro. I'll tell you what. So, that is a rough one right there. How's everybody doing this morning? See, last week, it was like a morgue when I came out, man. People were like, oh, it's just the rain. But we've survived death now. We feel really good about things. I love that, man. It's fantastic. Hey, really quick, couple of things before I get underway. The first is great news. I told you just a few weeks back at the beginning of the series that we're doing that it was the Pastors Appreciate You month, and so different things were happening. You know, we had the app for you and celebrated the building and everything else. But then also we told you that Pastor Trent has been working with people for some time now on a new website, and that is officially up and happening. And here's how much Trent in particular loves you. You no longer have to, unless you want to because you're nostalgic, you no longer have to type in www.myredemptionchurch.org because that's so long, right? Now it's as simple as imrc.org. It's so simple now. So, new website, new address. That way it's just real quick, real brief. If you share it with a friend, IMRC, that's an easy thing to remember, and he's done a great job. So you can still get all of our media content on there, find out about what's going on, and if you meet somebody in the community that is kind of thinking about church or kicking it around, you can just say, hey, check out our church website, gives you everything you need to know, imrc.org. So that's going to be really, really cool. So that's one thing that's going on, very excited about that. We're also still working on getting audio on the app, so we know a lot of you like to listen on the go. Hopefully we'll get that all squared up in the next week or so. So again, things are just happening. The other thing that's happening is stuff with the building. I want to give you some announcements really quick on that. Obviously, we took access of our new space for the hub, and eventually in about 3 years, hopefully for everything else. But we took access on the first weekend of October. And the crews have been in there. They've been doing demo. They're just starting to move into the framing stage and everything else. And so we said that, every once in a while we'll be giving you some updates on the building, updates on finances as it pertains to the building. And so after a few weeks, this is an update. So I want to take you back to, I think, 3 weeks ago, the last Sunday of September, and I shared with you, these were kind of what our goals were in relationship to one day seeing a full-blown RC sanctuary. So we said our first goal was wanting to raise $30,000 over the next 8 weeks. And so again, that started the end of September, that last Sunday, and we wanted to do that in 8 weeks. Then after that, we hope to raise an additional $100,000 over 6 months, and then after that, an additional $900,000 over 3 years. And we know that really the overall cost of this is going to be $3 million, but we know we can begin the project and do some lending things or things like that after we hit that $900,000. So that was kind of the plan, and that's everything else that we're kind of looking at. So that's what we launched 3 weeks ago. And then we said we'd give updates. So here's the first update. In those 3 Sundays, the first thing I want you to know is that we've already hit the 30,000 goal, right? So, very cool. Very cool. But that's not where it stops. I also want you to know that in that same amount of time, we said we wanted to raise after the 30,000 another 100,000 within 6 months. Of that 100,000, we've already raised 40,000 of the 100,000. Now, here's where it's even cooler, all right? Because different people are going to give to this in different ways. And so some are going to say, I want to designate some portion of my giving to the RC Sanctuary. And you can go on the app and drag down to that designated giving, or you could put on your check in the memo, designate it on our website. There's a way to designate it. But we know other people are going to say, I'm just going to give a little bit more than I used to give. I'm just giving it to general, and I'm assuming that makes it to the building. And it does. And here's how we're doing that. Basically, what we're doing is at the end of every month, After all the bills are paid, whatever is left over in the month, we're just going to put toward the building. That's just kind of like, oh, it's a surplus. We're going to move that surplus right over to the building. We have kind of a savings number established that's already there in case there's an emergency. So we just said, hey, anything over the monthly allotment, we'll just put toward building, which is great. Now, here's the other news, because you all have been so generous. Already this month, we've had, 2 Sundays? This is our 3rd Sunday for the month of 5. And in the first 2 Sundays of the month, the giving was so high that the entire month is already covered on top of these numbers, right? So 30 plus 40 plus basically another 60 has all come in like 2 weeks, which means the next 3 Sundays, 100% of the giving goes toward the building, which means that 40,000 will probably hit 100,000 by the end of the month. That's amazing. That is so cool. So amazing. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your generosity. I mean, our whole heart behind this was say, Jesus, hey man, lay this on the heart of your people. If you want to do this, we just don't want to, do that big guilt thing, pressure thing, the big campaign where every week it's, just we want you to guide your people and stimulate them to that. And so, again, just a huge encouragement as you give over the next 3 Sundays. Just know all of that's going to go right toward the space. And so, man, what a great opportunity to retire these numbers sooner than later. So if you want to give generically, that's awesome. The surplus always goes to the building. You want to give specifically, that's awesome. You can do that on your memo of your check, on the app, on our website, whatever mechanism you choose to give by. There's options to designate there as well. So there's the big announcement, the big update. So we've made our little, our thermometer, the R is red, the C is part red, and I think we're going to nail this thing pretty quick. So good times all the way around. So I'm going to pray right now. I thank you. I'm going to thank Jesus, and then we're going to get to business with what we have today. Jesus, I thank you for your word. I thank you for your church, and I thank you for your gift of your spirit. And what I find in that prayer right there is that the your is all caps. It's your church. It's your people. It's your spirit. It's your gospel. It's your word. And yet they're all gifts given to shape and build us in you. And I pray that we will cherish that. And I pray that we will always want to be on board with what you are doing, that we will long for your life to be thrust in our soul in such a way that we live from an abundance of you more than we simply live by white-knuckling the things of life. I pray that we are dependent. I pray that we are desperate. I pray that we are longing to have your life so much a part of ours that we see the fullness of life that you promise. Man, I want to thank you, Jesus, for just, again, the last few weeks. I mean, you know me, I can easily kind of look at things as daunting, or I can even be a pessimist, and then you kind of storm into my pessimism and say, Matt, I'm big enough to handle these things. Would you trust me? And it's a great reminder to me to just trust you. So I thank you for your provision. I thank you for the generosity of your people. I thank you that as they see you moving, they want to be in step with what you're doing. And man, that's just humbling for me. And so I thank you for them, and I thank you for you, and I thank you for our church and our time together. I thank you for the opportunity to get to know Brandon and Jesse today, and just those possibilities there. I pray that you would give them strength and encouragement throughout their day as they're meeting people. I pray for our people to just come around them and get to know them more, and to show them, man, the love that you have placed in our hearts in this place. And so I just thank you for that. I thank you for you, and I thank you for your grace in your perfect and good name. Amen. So we are currently in a series that will actually go one more week after this Sunday, and it's all about the church is. And again, there's a lot of motivations behind it, and it's kind of even morphed over the course of time. And this morning is going to be unique because, we have this backpack over here, and the backpack represents the different things that we value. We value the Word of God. We value tying to one another in community. We value the need to plant churches, and we value the need to storm hell with our super soaker because people need the gospel, right? We're on mission. We're missional theologians, that kind of thing. What this really is today, though, is the fact that all of us, as individuals, are called to strap this thing on. And we're all called to walk. We're called to walk, right? I mean, it's just a part of what's expected when you read through the context of the Bible. Now, when I was thinking about it this week, I realized something. It kind of struck me when I think about following and walking. And it's this truth that we all as human beings, we have this tendency to follow. right? We just follow all sorts of things. I mean, if you just start taking an inventory of the things that people follow, you'll know we're really awesome at following, right? We follow people on social media, right? So you might follow people on Facebook, or you follow them on Twitter, or you follow them on the Instagram. You follow them on whatever apparatus that's now cool because I'm 45 and I don't know cool. But there's hip, cool little new tools out there. You can follow people. So people follow other people on this. We follow our favorite sports teams, and we follow their stats. We might follow politics, and we follow the news, and we follow like cultural trends, and we follow celebrities. And I mean, there's just so many things to follow in life, right? Right? And some of you, man, it's just you follow people. It doesn't matter the person. Maybe you're a high school boy, and you keep following this girl. Can I tell you that's not following? That's stalking. And I know you're like, no, she's just playing hard to get. No, she's running away from you. It's not playing hard to get. She's fleeing for her life, right? But we follow. And in the following, whether it's, again, following politics or news or cultural trends or technical trends or whatever else, when we follow, one of the things we sometimes don't fully realize, maybe as well as we could, is that the things that we follow, and I want you to listen to this right now, the things that we follow have a tendency to shape us. The things that we follow have a tendency to define how we see the world, and they define who we are. And sometimes pretty radically, right? I mean, you can even think about, things like if you follow MSNBC, for example. It informs you in such a way that you begin to identify with the voice of that network. You know, you're commenting on politics the same way they comment on politics. And maybe you follow Fox News, you don't follow MSNBC. And so you sound the way they sound. You kind of think the way they think, and they inform your perspective on the world. If you follow the Seahawks, eventually what do you want to do? You want to buy one of their jerseys. You want to put somebody else's name on your back. I mean, this is how weird it is. This is how much we begin to become informed by that which we follow. We begin to identify with it so much. I throw on a jersey that says, I'm Marshawn Lynch. Do I look like Marshawn Lynch? There is nothing remotely close to myself and Marshawn Lynch, except we wear the same shirt, right? So, and it goes back to the fact that what you follow, you begin to emulate, right? So following is powerful. Now, there's another layer to following we probably wouldn't identify as following, but it's a layer that begins to inform our identity and who we are. For example, some of that may be in the realm of wants, right? So there's things we begin to want, and because we want them, we begin to follow on this treadmill where we're constantly moving, but we don't feel like we're ever quite getting or accessing. We want more money, or we want more control, or we want more security. And so we begin to follow these wants, and these wants begin to define us, and they saturate us, and we begin to fixate on the wants. It's a type of following. We don't normally see it as following, but it's a type of following nonetheless. Maybe there's other things like expectations that we have, and we expect others to do certain things and act in certain ways and respond this way and not respond that way, and it begins to drive us. These expectations drive us in life, and we hold our spouse accountable to these expectations, or our kids, or our employer or employees, and maybe they're fair, maybe they're not fair, but they begin to kind of just overly drive us. Sometimes what we begin to follow are things like fear. Right? It begins to pull us along where, we're always trying to figure out, how do I establish a new security to deal with my fears? How do I establish a new sense of control to alleviate my anxieties? And so that begins to drag us along. Maybe the deepest form of this is vices, where vice is literally, you're on the ground and it's dragging you along and you feel like, I have no control over this vice. It just pulls me. I'm not even really following at this point. I'm at the mercy of a vice that drags me through the gravel of life, right? All of those things are derivatives of following, right? God knows our propensity to follow. Right? And he knows that in the following, we are defined by that which we follow. Now, the Bible puts this in very different terms, but it's close enough that we'll see the connection. See, the Bible says that which we most revere, what we most admire, what we most trust, what we most celebrate, what we most elevate, what we most worship is that which we become. What we most place all of our eggs in the basket of will begin to then define our person. And this can be for good or this can be for bad. In the book of Hosea, you see an example of the bad where what we follow has the power to mold us into its own image. In the book of Hosea, chapter 8, there's a scene that unfolds. And I'll give you the background to Hosea. So Hosea is one of the minor prophets. It's one of the two minor prophets that are written to the northern tribes of Israel, right? So remember there was Saul, then David, then Solomon. The kingdom comes apart because people were idiots, and they started this whole civil kind of conflict with one another. The two tribes to the south are the Judean kind of aspect, and then the 10 northern tribes, they're doing their thing. And every one of them was bad. Every one of their kings was awful. And they walked away from God really quickly. But they didn't realize they were walking away from God really quickly. And so there was this trend in the book of Hosea, chapter 8, starting in verse 1. He says there, this is God speaking to Hosea. And poor Hosea, by the way, you got to understand, God says, dude, I'm going to use you as an illustration for the waywardness of my people. I want you to marry a woman whose name is Gomer. So yes, the name already tells you what she's like, right? Her name's Gomer, sexy, all right? And she's easy. She sleeps with everybody. I want you to marry Gomer the hussy, and that's going to be a working illustration of how Israel handles me, how they cheat on me in the same way your wife is going to cheat on you. It's got to stink to be Hosea, like, all right, Lord, I'll do this. So he does it, and then they have this illustration of it, and then God lays down what's going on then in chapter 8. He says, here's the problem with Israel. They have transgressed my covenant and rebelled against my law, right? So they still think they're good with God, though. You're going to see that right here where it says, but then they cry out, my God, we Israel, we know you. See, this is part of the trick, right? And this is why I want to even let us know that when I read Hosea and I'm talking to us, I'm talking to those who claim God. I'm not talking to the outside world that doesn't claim God. The problem with those who claim God is sometimes we say, God, we know you. But we transgress the covenant. We don't obey the standards. We look and go, yeah, God's important. God's our God. God's our guy. But then I'm going to do my own thing most of the time. And that's what's going on with these northern tribes. They're doing their own thing while they're claiming to know God. So then it goes into verse 4 and it says, now they start making decisions based on a different set of tools than me making the decisions in their lives. It says they made kings, but not through me. They set up princes, but none that I knew. And then it says, here's what's worse, with silver and gold they made idols for their own destruction. So you see the series of things in this passage, right? So they transgress the relationship, they don't obey the Bible, they claim to know God, but they don't really live like God is a part of their life, and they start to look for other things to be their saviors and their securities and their provisions and their hopes. They start setting up idols, and an idol is just an artificial God that you say, rescue me from my personal hell and give me my personal heaven, whatever that is. It's how simple an idol is. You're more secure than God. That's an idol. Right? And so they set up these idols to bring them what they want in life. Well, then you flip over to Hosea chapter 9, verse 10, and you see how the scene unfolds and how this begins to shape them. It says they came to Baal Peor, and Baal Peor is like the ultimate deity, right? He's like the main idol. He's the grand poobah, big hat, everything, right? It says they came to this Baal, and they consecrated themselves to things of shame. And this is where it's critical. I want you to hear this. They consecrated themselves to the things of shame and became detestable like the thing they loved. I want you to note that, right? It isn't just enough that you revere it. It isn't just enough that you dig it. It's not just enough that you trust it. But ultimately, the more you dig, trust, revere, follow, exalt, you worship it, you become what you worship. You become, if it's a detestable thing, you become detestable. If it's a wayward thing, you become wayward. If it's a selfish thing, you become selfish. If it's an egotistical thing, you become egotistical. And I think about that in all of the ways that we can follow items, people, blogs, posts, books, writers, thoughts, politicians, politics, news, celebrities, whatever it is. You look and go, man, if I revere, if I keep watching, if I am informed by, I become that thing. And some of those things are not healthy things. Some of those things stir in us discontent or frustration or anger, even violent anger sometimes, or they stir in us foolishness, right? Imprudence, whatever else. That's the risk of following something that in the end defines you as opposed to you define it. But if we shift our course, if we reorient to following another who then will make us into his image, life becomes different. This is why following is so important. We're going to follow no matter what. Now we're deciding what do we follow? See, this is why when Jesus comes into the world, he has this word he uses a lot. Follow. Follow. He'll keep saying it. Follow me, follow me, follow me. He'll keep saying it because he knows we all want to follow. He says you follow 10 million other things that lead to discouragement and despair and to darkness. Therefore, I'm going to give you an opportunity to follow one who gives life. In John chapter 8, it's this great scene. It actually starts in John chapter 7. So there's events that Israel do, right? They call them feasts or holidays, whatever else, right? There's different things. And one of the ones they do is called the Feast of Booths. And it's this time, it's about a week long, and what the people do is they set up in tents all near the temple there in the first century, and they think about the coming day when God will come again and he will live among his people. And so it's all of this kind of premeditative, man, one day we're not just going to be in tents and God's in heaven, but we're going to be surrounding God as God is on earth. And so they have this big celebration. And every night they take all of these lamps and they go into the court of the women at the temple, and all the lamps are lit right there as the sun's going down, and it's a remembrance that, you know what, light is coming to the world. Right? So in John chapter 7, the scene starts there, then it migrates into John chapter 8. It's the last night of the Feast of Booths. It's the big luminary celebration. Everybody lights their lamps, comes to the temple, goes into the court of the women. They're waiting for the big announcement, the big blowing of the horn, where they celebrate again that one day God will come among his people. And it's in that scene in verse 12 that Jesus then stands up and he says, I am the light of the world. That is such a cool scene. That's a gutsy scene is what I think too, right? So everybody's coming in with their lamps, thinking about the one day. And then just as everybody's waiting for the horn, here comes Jesus, pops up, right? Where's Waldo? Where's Jesus? Right there. And he says, these lamps aren't it. I'm your lights. You're waiting for God to come. God has come. I am the one that you want to follow. I am the one that illuminates. And so from that he says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I love this scene here because it's binary, right? It's binary. He says it's really simple. You don't follow me, you're going to be in darkness. It doesn't matter what the not me is. The not me may not be a bad thing, it's just not a him thing. The not me may be a really awful thing, and it's going to be clear. But he makes it as simple as it's A or B. It's 1 or it's 2. It's minus or it's plus. I mean, this is what I love about Jesus. He was not awesome at gray. Not on this stuff. He was awesome at the gray of loving people where they were at. He was awesome at the gray of being a friend of tax collectors, of sinners, of drunks, of gluttons, whatever it was. He was awesome at that. That gray was good. But in the gray, he always brought it back to this demarcation of one or the other, light or dark, right or wrong, black or white. And that's what he does here. He says, man, I'm the light of the world. If you follow me, man, you're going to have the light of life. You're going to be illuminated. You're going to see the world as it is. You're going to have a perspective that's different. You're going to be aware of the real problems and the real solutions, and you'll be able to work from that platform. But if you don't follow me, you're going to try to find 10,000 other solutions, and you're going to bow to all sorts of other things to fix it. And you know what? You're not ever going to feel truly illuminated. It's going to feel like just shuffling the decks of the deck chairs on the Titanic. You're just going to constantly be trying to get it to work, and it never quite works because, again, all of that is still scrambling in darkness. And so he makes it as simple as follow me, and I will illuminate your life, right? See, this is why I talk about kind of putting the pack on and strapping it tight and going where he's going. Because he invites us to follow. But that invitation, it's not casual. It's not extracurricular. It's not whenever it fits. It's not when my life falls apart and, oh crap, I need God now and I'm going to make it all right because my life fell apart, and then after 6 weeks when it's fine, we stop following again. It's not. He says, no, man, I want you to follow in a way that is truly following. That's a hardcore, full tilt, lean into Jesus directional thing. You're putting your body into the follow, right? That's what he offers. He doesn't offer us to go to Christ College, where he says, you take 90 credit hours and you get your prereqs and you memorize the books of the Bible and, you get your diploma that says graduated from Jesus College, right? Like, that's not his offer. His offer is an apprenticeship, this lifelong apprenticeship, where he says, all right, you're gonna do as I do, and you're gonna learn to think as I think, and you're gonna learn to react as I react, and you're gonna have a grid for life that's my grid for life, and where my foot goes, you want to put your foot in the footprint I left. That's the offer that he's going to have in all of this. And he offers it not simply because it's the duty of the believer. This is one of the things I really want to stress. It's so easy sometimes to think, so if I'm going to be a serious Christian that really faithfully follows God, I need to be really dutiful. And he doesn't offer it so we're dutiful. He offers it because he knows that when we untether from following lesser things and we follow him, it's what he said, life is illuminated, life is rich, life is fulfilling, life is abundant. Even when life falls apart, there is something more in the chaos when we follow him, not out of duty, but out of true desire, because he is the one that gives life. See, this is the offer. I'm going to change you. I'm going to fill you up if you follow me. But the offer isn't casual. It's not casual. In Luke chapter 9, here's how he laid out the offer. Luke 9:23 says, he said to all, not just to the elite, not just to the apostles, he said to everybody that was there, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and then take up his cross daily and follow me. Now that deny oneself sounds very sacrificial, right? But in reality, I believe it to be very self-interested more than sacrificial. He's saying, you already know a life of pain, you know a life of disappointment, you know a life of mistake, you know a life of bad decisions that have had horrible consequences. You've known all of that. And so this idea of denying self is saying, you know what, I'm tired of leading my life so poorly because in reality I just follow wrong things. So this is a sensible self-denial. This is not some kind of, I'm missing out. That's a sensible self-denial. I want to follow one who is better than the things that I've been following in life. More than that, he says, you don't simply deny yourself, you take up your cross. More than denying self, you die to self. You die to self-reliance and self-justification, self-righteousness, but you also die to self-loathing or self-harm or whatever else. I mean, there's a lot of self-fill-in-the-blanks that we may struggle with, and to take up a cross is to surrender ourselves to sacrifice. We don't crucify ourselves. All we can do is surrender, as Jesus did, to this idea of our cross, in this sense, dying to ourselves, living the pattern and example of Jesus. And we do this, it says here, daily. It's not occasional or Sunday or, again, when it's convenient. No, we strap on the pack every single day. We say, I deny myself every day. I die to myself every day. And then I follow him. Right? Which means we do need to become students. I mean, like legitimate students. Like we really should be a people that I would say at least annually should read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and just take notes of his tone and his temperament and his priorities, how he interacted with people, right? The things he spoke on, the things he just didn't address, right? His savvy for life. I mean, that's what it means to follow. Again, it's an apprenticeship, right? Where we're carefully paying attention. I think about this in my own life. It was a couple of months ago. I went with my friend Ray Pitts, who owns Old Rock Brewery, and I was learning how to brew beer with him. Right? And I could have done one of two things. I could have sat on a stool in the back and just watched Ray do stuff. I'd be like, oh, he took a bag of something and he poured it in that big silver thing. Cool. She's using a giant spoon now. Awesome. Oh, now there's like oatmeal, something pouring out the side. Interesting. I could have done it that way, but I wouldn't have been in an apprenticeship. I would have been kind of in an observer collegiate realm. Like I'm sitting back and watching. No, it was when I'm opening the bags and grinding the grains, when I'm, in the vat, when I'm learning how hot the water needs to be and checking the thermostat and checking the time and learning the system and watching the computer with all of the models in place. That's the apprenticeship of following someone. I think about the same thing with my father-in-law. This guy's like a genius at everything. And man, I was a mechanical idiot until I met Floyd. Right? And this guy just works on everything and fixes it. And so over the years, I've been out with them doing auto work and engines and small engines and everything else, and I couldn't get my generator to start yesterday. And poor Floyd, he's very weak with his cancer, and there's no way he would be able to help me. And so I had to go out and tear off the carburetor and take it all apart and everything else. I'm like, there's no way I could have done this unless I was under the apprenticeship of Floyd all these years. Right? So I followed in that sense. And I learned the details, and I learned the nuances, and I learned the little things you got to watch out for, and things have to go back in a certain way, and you really need to end with no extra parts, right? So otherwise you'd be like, 2 bolts and a screw and a spring. I'll put it in the collection bag, Like, it's not going to work out well, right? But that's what it means to follow, and certainly to follow Jesus, to follow his commands and his passions and his priorities. All of that is true. And what this means, in part, is it means we need to follow tight. If you're taking notes, I want you to write that. We need to follow tight. Because here's our temptation, one of two things. We are tempted to either race ahead or lag behind. We're tempted to race ahead by saying, I'm just going to take things into my hands now. I don't want to be patient and wait on God because, frankly, I've got a microwave. I don't have patience. Right? So I want to roll now. And so we get ahead of God with our plans and our priorities, agendas, worries, anxieties, doubts, whatever. So we race ahead and we're not following at that point. And what happens is we just find a different surrogate thing to follow. Usually leads to a bad place. Or we lag behind. We get kind of lazy and lethargic and lukewarm, and we just kind of fall back to our own things. And ultimately we find a surrogate that's going to be one that we follow in that vein. We just kind of eventually drift and find another deal. And so in light of that, what we need to do is to press in, be close. Matter of fact, here's something you're almost ever going to hear me do on a Sunday. I'm going to use a NASCAR analogy in the positive. Is Christy Lentz in here? She's missing this. Poor Christy. All right, but I think about like drafting in NASCAR. I've heard about it, never seen it. But drafting, right? You get right on the bumper, the one you're in front of, or the one that's in front of you, and from that, there's more energy, and there's more reserve, and there's more fuel, and there's an efficiency when you draft. And this is exactly the way we should follow Jesus. We should follow so tight, not getting ahead, not lagging behind, that there is an extra efficiency and strengthening because we're getting pulled along by him. More than just following, we're following so close, there is this thing that pulls us with him. We're compelled to where he's going. We want more of who he is and more of what he does and more of how he does it. So all of that begins to accelerate us as we draft behind him. And so I just want you to think about that. All right, my goal is to follow tight. My goal is to draft. I take the pack, I strap it on, and I roll so close that if it was a mudding race, I'm caked in the mud of his wheels, man. Just, I'm there. I'm so close. I'm there. See, that's the directive of what it means to follow. And I can guarantee you when we draft, every day really is better. Even the bad days are better. Even the bad days are better. But when we don't, when we race ahead or fall behind, even the good days aren't full. They're not robust. Because then they end, and then we find this kind of drought of the soul, right? When the weather changes in life. Right? We rely too much on these happy waypoints, but they just don't sustain. But when we draft Jesus, there's fullness. And this is why I'm trying to say, when I think about following Jesus, while there's one way in which to not follow is sin, and that's true, I'm trying to get us to a whole new way of looking at it as well, which is, and to not follow Jesus is not satisfying. It's just not satisfying to not follow. Following means satisfaction. Doing life as he did life means fullness and peace and contentment for living. I'd also say that following him is evidence that we are truly in him. 1 John chapter 2, verses 5 and 6 says this: "By this we know that we are in him. Whoever says he abides in him ought to walk in the same way in which he walked." So the question of the day is, what does such a walk look like? What are the principles and priorities of drafting behind Jesus? Of being tight in the following? I'm going to give you 4 quick principles this morning on how we should walk. Things that are to be the priority. And I believe if these are the priority, it all kind of distills down to the daily affairs of life. And so the first one is a given. It's easy. It's probably obvious to many of you. The first one, we are to walk in obedience to the truth. I mean, it's so simple. But I take this out of 2 John, which is a book that everybody's like, is there something you can actually get out of 2 John? Because it's really little. Yeah, there's some good stuff in 2 John, all 13 verses, all right? So, this is what he says. He says, "I rejoice greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as you were commanded by the Father." And he says, "And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments." Right? I love this because it's not just what we know, that we can take a theology test or a Bible quiz or an ethics exam and be good. I love it that it says what you know and what you do. And we know and do, not merely out of moral obligation, but what's it say here? Because this is love, right? We do what Jesus wants us to do because we love him, and therefore we love what he loves. And I've said this many times to us. Jesus does not give us the commands of the Bible because what he's doing is sitting up in heaven saying they're having way too much fun, and now I got to roll in as the great killjoy of the skies and tell them what to do. No, what Jesus knows is that to not obey his commands, that's what kills joy. Commands do not kill joy. Disobedience to commands, that kills joy. And he knows that, so he says, man, this is why I instruct you on what to do, so that you don't have your joy defeated. Rather, you would have a sense of love in your life and a sense of fulfillment. And so this is why we do what we do. I look at Jesus himself, right? Because we're following Jesus. What do you see about Jesus when it comes to obedience? He obeyed perfectly. He obeyed perfectly. Matter of fact, he obeyed even when it was hard. He obeyed even when it meant suffering and torture and death. But it's interesting in that because in Hebrews it says, and for the joy set before him, he endured the suffering, the cross, the shame. Right? So Jesus knows that, man, there is still joy on the other side of obedience. Again, obedience is not here to kill our joy. Obedience is here so that our joy is not killed. This is an important feature of what it means to walk. Walk in obedience. Walk obediently in truth. The second one, when it comes to really strapping on the pack and walking, is kind of, I'd say, closely linked to the first one, but it means to walk with timely wisdom. Walk with timely wisdom. Ephesians chapter 5, starting in verse 15. It says, look carefully then how you walk. I mean, just right there, that would be worth unpacking for a while, and I don't have the time. Well, if you brought a sack lunch, I have the time. But look carefully at how you walk. I mean, it's amazing how much self-reflection we don't do because we're so busy moving from event to event to event and keeping ourselves preoccupied with all these distractions. We don't self-evaluate often. It's good here to say, look careful at how you live. He says, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Now, one part of understanding the will of the Lord is the previous thing, right? We want to be people who know the Bible, man. We want to know what God says and why he says it and how I do it. We want to know that. But the other part is wisdom. And wisdom is this kind of tough to define thing because it's kind of learning the rhythms of God in relationship to the truth. Because there are things in life where, you know what, some things are not sin, but they're unwise. Right? There are some things that we go, man, God doesn't specifically say don't, but if I do it, I'm dumb. Right? And we know those types of things. Or we know that there are decisions that maybe it's a liberty, but it's ultimately going to be a folly in engaging in the liberty because I'm not at a place to handle the liberty without falling into folly. And so we want to then kind of come to this place of saying, how do I discern the kind of that grayness of life? How do I discern what it means to be truly wise, especially in the current generation where there's so many things yelling at us all the time that demand real wisdom, not reaction, right? Not just, ooh, that's shiny and it's new and it's cool and I want it. But where we say, no, I want to know, like, how would Jesus do this? How would Jesus discern this? I mean, I think about, like, just kind of off the top of my head, one of the moments of, like, real wisdom is when they roll in on Jesus. They're like, hey, bro, got a coin here. Should we pay taxes to Caesar or not because he's a dirtbag? And he kind of spins that whole thing and says, whose picture's on the coin? Give to Caesar's what's Caesar. Give to God what's God's. That was just wisdom in play. It wasn't like he ran to some particular verse. It was just like, he's like, here's something that's wise for you. It puts life in perspective. Where is your agenda? Where is your priority? That kind of thing. That's an example of wisdom. We need wisdom in the present age. I would say we live in a time and in a culture where we have plenty of knowledge. We have plenty of data, lots of smart people. We live in a part of the country that is crazy stacked with brilliant people. We don't need more brilliance, we need more wisdom. Right? We need more wisdom. And again, that runs deeper than any of us would even be comfortable with. When I look at the wisdom of Jesus, this was a dude that was so good at this. He was so wise. You know what he didn't do? He didn't pick every fight. He didn't pick every fight. And there was fights even probably worth picking that he didn't pick. Why? Because he's wise. He didn't get pulled into every argument because he was wise. Right? This is what's unique about Jesus. When people kind of question him with an agenda designed to dig at him or mock him or insult him, he was so wise because he would respond with what? A question. We want to respond with statements. Somebody insults us and says, so why do you Christians do this? We want to go, I'll tell you why, stupid. You know? Where Jesus would be like, oh, well, why are you asking that? And why are you asking with that tone? Is there something more? Right? Like, that's wise. The world needs Christians who are wise more than Christians who are simply knowledgeable. Right? Having the grace to discern. So, we walk in obedience to the truth, and we walk in timely wisdom. The third one, this is hard. This is hard for me. I confess it now. Third one's hard for me, but it's so important. We are to walk by foolish faith. We're to walk by foolish faith. Now, I say that, and some people are going to go, no, we're supposed to have reasonable faith. No, I totally agree. Our faith should be reasoned and reasonable, but I think this idea of subjective faith ultimately is foolish. Or at least we should live like it is foolish, because I think the way it's kind of seen can be foolish. I mean, I think about Jesus. People could look at Jesus and say, boy, that dude exercised a foolish faith because he was naive, right? He was sort of outside of the norm of how you get things accomplished. He was saying stupid, crazy stuff like to be the greatest, you got to be the least, to be the first, you got to be the last. Comes as the high king of heaven to be the servant and slave of all. Honestly, this is an inefficiency level that is highly foolish. But listen to what Peter says about this in 1 Peter chapter 2. He says, servants, it starts actually in verse 18, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. He says, for this is a gracious thing. When mindful of God, one endures sorrow while suffering unjustly. He says, for what credit is it if you sin and you're beaten for it and you endure? He says, like, whatever, you kind of earned it, so that's not the same. But when you do good and you suffer for it and endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For this you have been called to, because Christ, and this is what's key if we're following Jesus, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to the one who judges justly. That is foolish faith. I'm not going to defend myself. I'm not going to account for everything. I'm not going to answer your every question. Just go back and read the narrative of his arrest and beating and crucifixion. I mean, that's the example that we're given here, and it says to follow that example. So if somebody said, hey, Jesus, don't you think that from a worldly perspective, just kind of letting go, letting God, trusting him with you was foolish? He'd say, sure. The world looks at that and says, that is foolhardy, man. But in 1 Corinthians 2, what we see is it says the wisdom of the world is foolishness to God. Everything the world says, here's the most brilliant way of doing it. God says that is the most backwards way of doing it. See, God's wisdom is foolishness to the world. We should exhibit a faith that people say is foolish. Right? It's going to look foolish because you're actually trusting God to intervene or for God to provide, for God to be the advocate or for God to be the vindication. Instead of going rogue and freaking out and missing out, we trust him. Now, in all candor, is this kind of obedience easy? Is this wisdom that we're talking about convenient? Is faith effortless, especially a foolish type of faith? No. Faith isn't easy. Obedience isn't easy. Wisdom isn't easy. Which is why I always look to Jesus. Because it's not about whether it's easy or practical, but it's just about what Jesus did. If I'm just supposed to follow Jesus, then I do what he did. And then I look at what he did even in the worst time of his life, and I see the example of wisdom and faith and obedience. I see it in Luke 22. It's a scene that we're familiar with. He has a meal with his disciples. They have the first communion. And in verse 39 it says, and he came out and he went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples, they followed him. And this time it's so he can pray. And so he goes there, and it says, then he withdrew in verse 41 from them about a stone's throw away, and he knelt down to pray. And he said, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. It says, and there appeared an angel to him from heaven, and it strengthened him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. Now, every time I read this, it speaks to me. Because here is a scene in which following is hard. Now, Jesus is God. But this is a scene where following is hard. I want you just to track it back through. Here's what he starts off with. He prays. And he says, Father, I know what's about to happen. When it says, let this cup pass from me, what he knows is that God is going to take his full measured wrath and pour it on Christ for all the sins of everybody who are in Christ, right? This is a major thing. Christ will suffer the eternal hell of all people that are his on the cross. I mean, this is the level of the magnitude of this. So he's saying, Father, if there's another way for the wrath to be dealt with and for you to be at peace in yourself and your justice, let this pass. So this is agony for Christ. He says, but not my will, your will be done. This is where he's obeying. He's wisely praying and seeking and inquiring of God, but he's prepared to do what he needs to do, right? No matter what, even though it is hard. And it says an angel strengthens him. Now, here's what I love about this. He prays, he asks, God strengthens him through an angel, and notice what Jesus does. He takes that strength. This is something that I don't think we do nearly as well as he does. He takes that strength and he reallocates it to praying even more passionately. See, here's what I do. God, I have a problem. Please, I have a problem. I have a problem. Would you get me out of this problem? Will you deal with this problem? Will you help me with this problem? And God strengthens me, and I immediately get up. I can go do this, and I go and do it. I don't often say, you've strengthened me, now I'm going to reallocate that to a deeper prayer. I want just enough to go do what I need to do. Jesus reallocates the prayer and the strength to a deeper prayer, and he prays with great agony in all of this, right? I mean, deep, deep agony. But he intensifies his prayers to offset the agony. And what I love in the scene as it unfolds is that then there must be more strength that happens, because when you look at the Gospel of Matthew, we see Jesus pops up eventually with real resolve. I think sometimes we envision like Jesus is there praying, and then he says, all right, that's it, all right. All right, fellas, you're sleeping, you're idiots, get up, let's go. And then suddenly everybody rolls in when he's talking to the fellows that are all asleep and being dumb. But actually what you see in Matthew is that he is going to meet his accusers. He's like, I'm going to go meet these guys. Come on, fellas, you're dumb, but let's go. We're going to go talk to these guys. Right? So there's a resolve that comes out of that reallocation of strength based on a continual sense of prayer. And again, this is when life is hard. So again, I go back to this inspires me because life wasn't even super easy for Jesus all the time. These things wouldn't have been easy for Jesus all the time, and he was God and sinless and perfect. And yet, man, this is how he responds. I should respond too in foolish faith, trusting God, because that's the example that Jesus left for me to do. And so we obey, we seek wisdom, we seek faith, and then last here, we walk from the place of hope. We walk from a place of hope. Hebrews chapter 10, starting in verse 19, it says, therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy place by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that is opened for us through the curtain that is his flesh, and since we have a great priest over the household of God, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. For he who promised is faithful. I don't want to kid us. I think sometimes the means are really hard. Right? I think the means of life are really hard, but the end is promised. And so we don't want to lose our hope in the midst of it. Whatever you might be facing, there's going to be a lot of things. There's going to be family things and kid things and health things and life things and emotional things and cultural things and country things and global things. There's going to be all sorts of things that want to ride roughshod over us obeying and being wise and being faithful and being hope-filled. Like, there's all sorts of things that want to work against us. And I guarantee you that every one of those things that want to work against us will have victory if we fail to follow. That's why we have to stick on his heels every day. It's why we have to draft Jesus every day. And yet in doing this, we do this for more than just the sensibility reason. I'm going to say we do it for three reasons, and they're just going to be really quick. But we do this for three primary reasons. The first is that we walk worthy for God's sake. The reason we get into this whole thing, we strap on the pack and we begin to go, I would not say it's first and foremost for us. It's first and foremost for God. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Paul says, for you know how like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. Why do we want to walk well? I would say to make God proud. I mean, like a child to a parent. We want to walk well because we want to make you proud. We're grateful for what you have done. And our gratitude translates, right, into this whole idea of giving God the value that he's due. This is what it means to glorify God. People are like, I don't know what to glorify God means. What's that mean? It just means to give a sense of weight to the value that he's due. And so when we walk like Jesus and act like Jesus and think like Jesus and react and respond and plot forward behind Jesus, man, we're saying, God, I see the value of who you are. I'm grateful for what you've done, and therefore we're walking worthy for his glory. That's why we walk. The second reason we walk worthy is for people's sake. Colossians chapter 4 says, walk in wisdom toward outsiders. It's verse 5. Making the best use of time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Why are we to walk like Jesus? Because people are watching. Because people are watching. And in that, people are watching through a lens. We know this. The lens today is a stereotype. Right? So for us, we know that there is a stereotypical evangelical Christian lens that our culture uses. And that lens is oftentimes the stereotype that is either from The Daily Show, or a stereotype that is from The Nightly Show, or a stereotype that is from the craziest person CNN could find to represent evangelical Christians. Right? They're like, not crazy enough. You can find a crazier one. We're going to put her on, Like, it's kind of what they do. I watched it the other night. I'm like, no, this is a train wreck. Please make it stop. We've got 10 million other people that could say this way better right now, And yet, that's the lens. We can curse that and say this is slanted, it's media, it's propaganda, it's liberal bias, it's whatever else. Here's the lens. It's just the lens. It's just the stereotype. And so what does it mean for us? We need to be out in the world disrupting stereotypes. We have to be that other thing where they went, oh, you're not like them. Yeah, no, dumb. Most of us aren't. Right? But we need to be the disruptors. Where we do it different, where, if anything, we do it like Jesus. And you know what's kind of interesting about that? Everybody seems to kind of dig Jesus anyway. Everybody claims him. Even people that don't believe in him, like Richard Dawkins, Jesus didn't exist, but if he did, he was a good fella. All right. And so, again, the more we walk and talk and think and act and react and respond and have the tone and temperament and the rhythms of the one that we follow, the more they're going to be like, oh, you're not like them, right? I see it. This is why I love that verse where it's having your conversation be gracious, seasoned with salt, right? It means for us we have to do our homework. We have to watch our words. We have to watch our actions. I remember years ago there was the what would Jesus do? And people are like, that's so dumb, what would Jesus do? It's like the most brilliant thing in the world, actually. Yeah, just think that one through for a minute. I'm sitting down on social media. I'm mad about something. What would Jesus do? What would Jesus write? What I would write would be funny. Jesus, he'd go mow the yard right now, though. And it's just working. What would Jesus do, right? What would Jesus approve of? What would Jesus disapprove of? This is how we walk. So we walk for God's sake. We walk for people's sake. And then last, we walk for the sake of our own joy. I do think there's a self-interested element to this, and I think we should walk following Jesus for the sake of our own joy. In John chapter 15, Jesus uses an illustration, and we don't have a lot of grapevines here in the valley, but we have a lot of berry bushes. We have an unholy amount of berry bushes. It's like Satan came into the valley and just spread berry bushes as the plight of our lives and the bane of our existence. But it's an analogy still, right? And you have this crazy vine that's so destructive and has this fruit on the end that's so delightful as long as you don't mind being cat-clawed to death to get it, right? And it seems so invasive, but all you have to do is just clip it and the whole thing goes, right? Whole thing goes. And so Jesus uses the same type of illustration, and he says in verse 5, I am the vine and you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he is the one who bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If you get clipped from Christ, man, there's nothing you can do. Apart from him, you can do nothing. Now in him more, man, there's much that can happen. So then he goes into verse 10, and he kind of defines what he means by being this vine and branch and relationship and in him and abiding and being fruitful versus not fruitful. He says, let me tell you what that means. It means if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands, and I abide in his love. So proximity to Jesus equals effectiveness, and obedience to Jesus equals an experiencing of the love of God and Christ, right? That's all there. And what's the result? Good Christian people who have no fun. Is that the result? Verse 11. He says, I say these things to you that you may have joy. That my joy may be in you and that your joy may be filled. I look at this and I go, man, there are times in my life where I am joyful. And there are times in my life that I am not joyful. And what I've learned over the course of time is I've never chosen a life of seeking Jesus and obedience where in the end I go, that sucked. I've never done that. I've never been at a point in my life where I am really solid with Jesus and I go, man, that did not pay off. You want to know where my absence of joy comes? My guilt, my shame, my embarrassment, my folly. I look back and I go, that Matt, I would punch in the face if I can meet that Matt today. It's when I didn't follow. I've never had regret for following Jesus. I only regret when I don't. I have had no regret for obeying. I only have regret when I disobey, right? And so I look at this and I go, it makes perfect sense that Jesus says, man, here's why you want to obey. For your joy. Here's why you want to obey. For your peace, for your contentment, for your purpose, for a fueling, for a sensing of God's love in your life. I would say closeness and compliance. It disrupts the mundane living, and it gives a fullness of life. And so I'd say we are called to aggressively follow, right? Not just because it's right, but because it's good, because it's wise, because it's joyful, because it's true, because it gives life. Let's pray together. Jesus, I thank you for your wisdom. I thank you for your grace. I thank you for your word. I thank you for your example. I mean, it goes back to that passage in 1 Peter, right? You walked in those ways, giving us an example to follow. I pray that we would be desperate to follow. And to follow you, we get easily distracted to race ahead or fall behind and follow other things, but I pray that we would be self-aware, that your Spirit would convict us in such a way that we know and see, and therefore we draft you and stay close, stay desperate, and from that we have life. We love you and thank you in your name.